right. Good morning. It's good to see everybody this morning. If you have a Bible, turn with me to John chapter 11. We're going to be in John chapter 11 this morning. Looking at a lot of the text. We'll be in a lot of the chapter this morning in John 11. And we're in our fifth week of our I Am series. We're looking at the self-identity of Jesus. In other words, who did Jesus say that he was? Who did he claim to be? Not what other people claimed about him, but who did he claim actually to be? So we're looking at all of the various I am statements in the Gospel of John through this series. And the one for today, and again, this is our fifth week. The one for today is found in verse 25 there in chapter 11. Verse 25 in chapter 11 says, Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Say that one again. I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. This is, in my opinion, the most dramatic I am statement that Jesus makes in the Gospel of John. And it's paired up with what I also think is the most dramatic sign that Jesus does in the Gospel of John. We talked about this particularly, I think, in the first week. The signs that John records. What is a sign? What is a sign? Well, a sign is a miracle that points people to Jesus' real identity for a purpose. What's the purpose? So that we can believe in him and find life. All right, so we're always looking for signs. We're always looking for God to show us something, to tell us something about our situation, about what step we should do. I prayed for a sign in high school. You know, God, who do you want me to date? Didn't work out that well, but I prayed for that kind of sign. But we're always looking for a sign. But in John, what does a sign mean? A sign is a miracle that points people away from the miracle and to the identity of Jesus for a purpose so that we could believe and find life. In John chapter 20, verse 30, John gives us the purpose of these signs very explicitly. He says in John 20, 30, and 31, he says, Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book. Wouldn't you like to know what those signs were? Wouldn't you like to have had a record of those things? I'd be very interested. What are the other signs that Jesus did? It's more than just the 7 here. John records 7 for us, but he says here, Jesus did many signs. There were many signs that Jesus performed in this gospel that were not recorded. And all these 7 signs that he does, though, they're all miraculous things. They're all miraculous acts that Jesus performs, but none of them, they have this in common, none of them are actually strictly about the miracle itself. All of them serve God's bigger purpose. They're not just about the miracle, they're about pointing people in the direction of Christ. That's what a sign does. A sign points you. You're not supposed to look at the sign. You're supposed to look at what the sign points you to. And the sign points us to Jesus Christ. And so all of these miraculous things that Jesus did, if you had eyes to see it, you wouldn't get stuck on the sign and fixated on the sign itself. It would point you towards the Lord. That's the whole point of these things, to point us towards Jesus. So many people saw him, like we saw with the feeding of the 5,000. That is a sign that points people to the fact that Jesus is the bread of life. Well, a number of the people saw that incredible miracle, and they got stuck on the bread. They got all caught up in the fact that they had food to eat, but missed the fact that Jesus was the bread of life. And that happens frequently. Every single one of these signs is greeted by unbelief on the one hand and belief on the other hand. But these signs are all meant to point people to Jesus so we could believe. Verse 31 of chapter 20. John says there's many signs, but these 7, what I've recorded, they're written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. So it's believe and find life. That's the purpose of the signs. And guess what? That includes this final sign, also the raising of Lazarus from the dead. And I bet, when you look at it, I bet you've never looked at it that way. I bet you've never thought about the story of raising Lazarus from the dead in this particular way. You thought, and I thought probably until I really studied and looked at it, I thought, and you thought that the raising or the story was about Lazarus. But the story is not about Lazarus. Think about this. If this were a story that were about Lazarus, it would have been written very, very differently. It would not come across like it comes across here in John chapter 11, because Lazarus is barely a part of the story. In fact, he's almost like a secondary character in the story. He doesn't get one word of dialogue at all. Not before he's raised from the dead, not after he's raised from the dead. You get no line of dialogue from him. The only time that you see him is in this scene at the end of the story when Jesus calls him out of the grave and he kind of comes stumbling out in this full body wrap, kind of stumbling, looking like a mummy or something like that. That's the only time that you see him show up. And after that moment, he's not seen again in the rest of John or in the rest of the New Testament. He's not heard from again in the rest of John or the rest of the New Testament. There's nothing about him again that's ever said. It's the biggest miracle in Jesus' earthly ministry, and we get nothing. You get nothing about what he witnessed in those 4 days. Wouldn't you want to know that from someone if they had been dead for 4 days? Wouldn't you want to hear their testimony of what those 4 days were like? Wouldn't you have wanted him to kind of write the book, Heaven is for Real, and tell you what heaven is like when he comes back? But we get no testimony like that. There's not the movie that he made that he sold the rights to. There's none of that after he's raised. There's no testimony recorded about what it was like to wake up in the tomb after he's been dead for 4 days. What must that have been like? To have been in heaven itself, in the presence of God, and then to wake up back on this earth in a resurrected body. You don't hear any of those things. Why not? Because this story is not about Lazarus. The story of Lazarus being raised from the dead is not about Lazarus being raised from the dead, but it's about Jesus being the resurrection and the life. That's what this story's about. Jesus is not, or Lazarus is not the point of the story. Jesus is. And I wish that we could grasp that in our lives. I wish I could grasp that in my life. I wish you could grasp that in your life. You may have already grasped it. Praise the Lord if so. But I wish that we could grasp the fact that our lives are not about us. Your story is not about you. My story is not about me. Our stories, our lives, we are signs that point people to Jesus. If we belong to the Lord, then your life and my life is a sign to point people back to Jesus. Now, that's another sermon. That's not today, but I just wanted to throw that in for free because you need to think like that. How different would your life be if you didn't see it as being all about yourself, but all about pointing people to Christ? So this story, John 11, like a lot of stories in the Bible, functions at 2 levels. There's a lot of stories like that. Some of them function at multiple levels, and this story functions at really 2 levels. At one level of the story, it's all about the Christian hope in the resurrection of the dead. That is a glorious hope. That is a reality. That's what all of us are waiting on. Our greatest hope is not, and many of us think like this, but our greatest hope is not that when we die, we go to heaven. That's true, but that's not the ultimate destination. We're waiting for something to happen after that. All right? Your existence for all eternity is not you floating around in disembodied bliss. It's not you traveling around on top of the clouds, strumming a harp with a halo on your head. That's not our ultimate destination. No, it's a lot earthier than that. We're looking forward to a time that one day Jesus, just like he was raised from the dead, will resurrect your bodies out of the grave and give you a new, perfect, glorified, sinless, sickless, never-ending life kind of a body. That is our hope. And this text is about that at one level. It does point forward to that. It does foreshadow that. it does give us a picture of what's going to happen one day when we hear the voice of the Lord and we're raised up from the dead. It is like about that at one level, but on another level, this is about how that forever kind of life, about how that eternal life that Jesus promises, that Zoe life that Jesus promises to all who believe in him, it's about how that life invades our lives now. That's how we read this. This is how I read this. It's about how the forever life of God, the eternal life of the Son, invades into our present existence. And I love this quote. I know I quote Warren Wiersbe a lot, but he's a very quotable guy. This quote from Warren Wiersbe about this, he said, "The Lord can move into dead and seemingly hopeless situations, and by his resurrection power transform people and circumstances and infuse life that makes everything new." That's a great quote. If you don't take notes, it's worth taking notes just for that. The Lord can move into dead and seemingly hopeless situations, and by his resurrection power transform people and circumstances and infuse life that makes everything new. And that's our key truth for the day today. Jesus infuses life into our dead and our hopeless situations. And this is about having the faith to believe that even when it seems hard to believe. Jesus asked Martha a question in verse 26. After confronting her with his identity, he asked Martha this question. He says, "Do you believe this?" That's what I want to ask you before we go any further. Do you believe this? Do you believe that Jesus is the one and the only one that can infuse and bring life into your dead situation, into your hopeless situation, whatever it might be? Do you believe that even when it's hard to believe? Because it's easy to believe that in here. It's easy to believe that when you're not in a dead and hopeless situation. It's easy to believe that when everything is going well. But do you believe it even when it gets hard? That's what is going on here. That's what's confronting Martha and Mary and the crowds who looked on and the disciples. There's a hopeless situation, and Jesus brings life into it. He infuses it with life. And maybe that's what God wants to do in your life this morning. I don't know. I don't know what you're going through this morning. I don't know what kind of situations you have. I don't know if you're in the middle of a dead situation. I don't know if you're in the middle of a hopeless circumstance in your life. But maybe this morning God wants to remind you that he and he alone, the resurrection and the life, is the one that can infuse and bring life into that dead situation and circumstance in your life. And he's asking you this morning, believe me, and find life. So I want to ask you 3 questions this morning. This will be the points. 3 questions. Number 1, can you believe when God delays? Can you believe when God delays? There's this tension that rides all throughout this story, particularly in the first 16 verses here. But it starts out with a message that Mary and Martha send to Jesus. You ever send somebody a message and they don't respond right away? Send them a text message and maybe they look like they're going to respond and you see the ... and then it's there for a second and then it disappears. Like, what's going on? Or they just, even worse, you never even see the ... No. The worst is you see they've received it and they don't respond. It's like, what's going on? Why aren't you responding to my text message? Or you call some people, particularly millennials, and their voicemail box is full, so you can't even leave them a message. So that's what happens. It starts out not a cell phone call, but a message that Mary and Martha send to Jesus. Now, these are some of Jesus' best friends in the world. And in verse 3, they tell Jesus their brother is sick. Look how they put it there in verse 3. It says, "So the sisters sent to him, saying, 'Lord, he whom you love is ill.'" He whom you love is ill. Jesus loved Lazarus. That's a point you need to hear right at the very beginning of this. Lazarus was his dear friend. Martha and Mary were his dear friends. We'll learn that in just a minute. He whom you love is ill, and now he's in this great hour of need. All of them are. They're all in probably the greatest hour of need in their life. They all have not just a great need, but an urgent need. This is like a 911 moment for them. You call 911 when you have an urgent emergency need. So that's what this is. This is a 911 moment. How many of you right now, you have an urgent need that you're bringing to the Lord? You have a 911 kind of a need that you've sent the message out to Jesus. So we all have great needs. Every one of us have great needs, but not all of our great needs are urgent needs. Not all of our great needs are 911 type moments. So do you have an urgent need in your life right now? This is one where you need God to act, but you don't need him to act tomorrow. You need him to act today. Do you have any needs like that in your life right now? Maybe you don't right now, but maybe you did. Maybe you will. You don't need God to wait. You need him to act right now. And if he doesn't act right here, right now, in this moment, it's going to be too late. He can't wait till tomorrow. You need a miracle of some kind in your life right now. That's what the sisters need. They need Jesus now. But notice the polite way that they ask without asking. So notice they don't ask anything. They don't say, Jesus, our brother who you love is sick, and we want you to come heal him, and please hurry up before it's too late because he's fading fast. That's not how they do it. No, the request is implicit here. They don't even think they need to ask. Why not? Why don't they think they need to ask? Because he loves Lazarus. They know that. He's healed lots of people. They know Jesus has healed lots of people. Many of the people Jesus has healed, he didn't even know. And so they think surely when he hears about the one he does know, and surely when he hears about the one that he does love, he's going to come right away. That's what they're thinking. They're thinking, if he knows, then he'll come. And so they send him the message, and now they know he knows. He's read their text. It's been received. It's been read. But look at his response. Jesus' response is not what we would expect it to be based on what it says about him. We would expect his response to be to grab his disciples, call them all together, be like, pack your suitcase now. Get your stuff. We're heading out this morning, right away. Get a couple of days. It's going to be a couple of day trip. We're going to stay there for a few days. We'll be back. But go ahead and do it. We got to go now. We got to hurry before it's too late. That's what we would expect him to do. But instead, look what he does do. Look at in verse 5. In 5 it says, now Jesus loved not just Lazarus, but Martha and her sister and Lazarus. He loves the whole family. So when you read that, you go, now I know he's going to hit the road. It says he loves them. He's going to come right away. But instead, look. So, very little word, but important word. When he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Now, that's weird, right? That's not what you expect to hear. It says he loved them, so he stayed 2 extra days. Do you know what that means? That means he waited, he delayed, because he loved them. And all of us need to remember that God doesn't operate on our timetable. Sometimes he makes you wait, and sometimes you think he's making you wait because he's mad at you. You think it's because you've done something wrong. You think it's because he doesn't care about you. You think it's because he doesn't love you. You've sent the message to him, God, this is urgent. God, I need you to show up before it's too late. But then God doesn't show up immediately. What does he do instead? Instead, he waits 2 days to take a 2-day journey. He takes 16 verses to get there when you thought he was just going to take 1. You sent the message in verse 3. You would expect him to be there in verse 4, but he doesn't get there till verse 17. But what you need to know is he didn't delay because he's mad. He didn't delay because he doesn't care. It says he delayed because he loved them. God oftentimes will make you wait because he loves you. Because he loves you. We don't see this. Sometimes the most loving thing God can do is make you wait. Because it doesn't feel like love when you're waiting, does it? When the delay is happening, especially in that urgent need, it doesn't feel like love. It feels like apathy. It feels like the opposite. It feels like he doesn't care because one day passes by and they know it's a 2-day journey, but one day passes by and they're thinking all throughout that first day, if we could just make it through today, he'll be here tomorrow. All we got to do is wait. Lazarus, just hang on. If you can just hang on, it's just going to be one more day. Just one more day. And that one day passes and it goes into 2 days and nothing happens. And they're thinking, when is Jesus going to come? When's he going to get here? Because they've watched their situation go from bad to worse. They've watched the situation go from hopeful to hopeless. And I'm sure they're thinking all along, what is Jesus doing? It's day 2 now. Lazarus is dying. He's not just sick now, but we need him to show up. What's he doing? Why is he delaying? Did he get stuck in a traffic jam? Did he have a meeting that went on too long? What's going on here? What's so important? What is Jesus doing that is so important that he waited 2 full days to leave? And finally, Lazarus dies. And if you notice as you read through, it's not until Lazarus dies that Jesus starts coming to see him. He waited till he died. 2.5 days too late. So I don't know where you're at. I don't know if you've waited for God to show up and you feel like you waited too long and you've watched your situation get worse. You've watched it go from a bad situation to an awful situation. You've watched it go from a hopeful situation because you've taken the message to the Lord to a hopeless situation because he didn't get there yet. He's not there. And you're going, I want to know why, God. I know you love me, but why are you delaying? I know you love me, but why did you wait too long? Why did you wait? And listen to this. He delayed because he had a bigger purpose in this situation. He delayed, verse 4 says, because he's going to use this as an opportunity to glorify himself in a way that he couldn't do if he got there on time. So what I want to say to you is, if you're waiting on God and he hasn't shown up yet, don't take it the wrong way. It's not because he doesn't love you. It's not because he doesn't care about you. It's not because because he's apathetic towards you. No, it's because he does love you and because he has a bigger purpose that he wants to accomplish in your suffering and in your hurt. And you can't see this right now, but what he wants to do is, in this dead situation, he wants to use it as an opportunity to bring glory to the Father and to the Son. Can you believe even when he waits? Can you believe when he delays? Second question. Can you believe when you're disappointed? Can you believe when you're disappointed? So Jesus, after 16 verses have gone by, verse 17 tells us he finally gets there after Lazarus has been in the tomb for 4 days. So they get the message to Jesus. Jesus waits 2 days. He starts making this 2-day journey. And when he gets there, they find out, or they tell him, Lazarus has been in the tomb 4 days. And Martha hears that Jesus has shown up. He's finally there. He's finally gotten there. And she rushes off like Martha does and rushes up to meet him. And she's not being disrespectful to the Lord, but she's expressing disappointment. You can hear it coming out in her words. Verse 21. Verse 21 says, Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Lord, if only you would have been here, my brother would not have died. Can you hear the disappointment? What is disappointment? What is it? Disappointment is all about unmet expectations, right? That's what disappointment actually is. It's when your expectations are unmet. It's when what you expect to happen is not the thing that happens. Some of you know this story, probably, I don't know who. I don't ever remember what I've said and what I haven't before, but when I was in high school in 10th grade, I got my first vehicle. And it was this little red Mazda B-Series pickup truck. It was a straight drive, just a little nothing four-cylinder, but I loved the thing. And I remember I loved the first night. I remember the very first night I took it out, scooted around town, cutting off at stoplights and having to restart the thing as I was learning how to use a straight drive. And I loved that truck. And, it was the greatest truck you could ever have, in my opinion, as a 10th grader. But one day, I was driving somewhere in Bowling Springs on number 9, and I was stopped at a red light at Old Furnace Road. And I was the first one in the red light, and I'm stopping, and I'm waiting on the light to turn green. And I look up in my rearview mirror, and there's a big F-150 just barreling towards me, and it doesn't slow down. And I could see it, almost like slow motion. I could see the driver's dead-looking eyes in my rearview mirror. I still remember it to this day, as he never did hit the brake and just plowed right into the back of my truck. Knocked me out into the intersection. Thankfully, I wasn't hurt. It wasn't anything bad for me. But what was bad is it totaled my little Mazda pickup truck. And I was so disheartened, but you know what I expected to happen after that? I expected to get a replacement. That sounds really bad. Let me just go back. My parents graciously gave me a replacement, but they didn't replace it in the way that I wanted them to. I wanted another truck, but what they did was they generously passed on the next family car to me, and so I drove for the next couple of years a white Mercury Sable station wagon. That was my vehicle. It's like, not then and not now is that ever anything a teenage boy would want to drive, or any other teenager for that matter, boy or girl. Like, who wants to drive the Mercury wagon? Who wants to drive the party wagon, the white whale? That is not the vehicle that anybody wants to drive, but that was mine. Okay, so they gave that to me, and I thought, that's just temporary. They just gave it to me kind of like to hold their place for a little bit till they could get it worked out so I could get my new truck. Or old truck, didn't matter, just new to me truck. So it was like, hold a place, but every year, birthday, Christmas, I'm expecting to wake up Christmas morning and look out my window, and they pulled a new little red pickup truck in the driveway. And it's got a bow on it, and it's got my name on it, a little card. It said, Josh, we love you. Merry Christmas. That's what I expected. And for probably 3 years, I woke up on Christmas morning, looked out that window, and there wasn't any truck there. There never was any truck. I had to buy the next one that I got. But the point being, I was disappointed. Why? I was disappointed because my expectations hadn't been met. Should I have expected that? No, that was terrible of me. I see that now in hindsight. My kids better not expect that from me. They'd given me everything I need, but I didn't get what I wanted. I didn't get what I wanted, so what? I was disappointed. I was disappointed because I did not get what I expected to get. And so here you have Martha in this story, and she is expressing what she expects to happen. She's expressing what she thought would happen. And what she thought was, Jesus will come and heal my brother. But what happens instead is Jesus defied her expectations. He didn't do what she thought he was going to do. He didn't do the thing he had done for other people. She knows this. He could have just asked the Father. He could have healed from a distance. He didn't even have to make the journey. If you think back to chapter 4 in John, if you remember the story, Jesus heals a nobleman's son without ever having gone to him. He just said the word and the guy was healed. So they know Jesus could have done that. And Martha even expresses, sort of implying it in verse 22. She said, even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. Kind of just sort of implying, God, why didn't you just, or Jesus, why didn't you just ask your father? Why didn't you just ask your dad? Can you hear the disappointment in that? Can you feel that? Do you understand? Knowing he could have done something, but he didn't do it. Knowing he could have healed her brother, but he didn't do it. So Jesus said, look at verse 23. This is how Jesus responds. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. But do you know how she heard that? She didn't hear it the way that we read it because we know the whole story. We know what Jesus means here. We know that what he means is he's going to rise here in just a couple of minutes. But what she hears is something different. She hears the same thing that you and I hear when we're going through a hard time, a dark time, a hopeless time. She hears the same thing we hear when someone comes up to us and says, it's going to be okay. That's what she's hearing. It's just a generic statement. She hears in it a point of abstract theology. That's what it is. She's hurting. Her brother's dead. She's disappointed, and she hears abstract theology. Yes, I know Jesus, one day he's going to rise again. I know that on the last day he'll be resurrected. I know he's safe in the arms of God. I know that he went to heaven when he died. But Jesus here is not talking about abstract theology. He's not giving her a lecture about the end times so she'll have her eschatology straight. When you go through a dark time of frustration and disappointment and discouragement and hopelessness, you don't need to be confronted with something abstract. You need something tangible, concrete, and personal. And that is what Jesus gives her right here. He's giving her not abstract theology, but embodied theology. She's giving her himself. He's sharing who his identity is. He is the embodiment of the theology that she's been talking about. Look at verse 25 again. I am the resurrection and the life. She said, I know one day it'll be better. No. You don't know. Listen to me. I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. And she still doesn't get it. But what Jesus is saying is, yes, I defied your expectations, but I defied them because I'm about to exceed them. That's a beautiful thing. Jesus, I'm disappointed you didn't do what I wanted you to do. Yes, I defied your expectations, but you just wait. And in his own cryptic kind of way, Jesus always speaks cryptically. In his own cryptic kind of way, he said, I know I didn't meet him. I'm about to exceed him, though. How many of you expected God to do something very specific in your life, and God defied your expectations? You wanted God to do something very specific. You wanted, just like Martha and Mary, for him to take things back to the way they were before. That's what healing really is. Restore his health. Restore his get me back to before. Heal me. Heal my sickness. Heal my situation. Get it back to how it was, and we're longing for how it was. That's what restoration looks like. That's what healing looks like. Take me back to the way that I was. But Jesus didn't want to restore Lazarus. He wanted to resurrect Lazarus. He didn't want to take Lazarus back to how it was before. He wanted to take it far beyond what it's ever been before. And he doesn't just want to restore what you had in your life. He wants to resurrect that situation, not just take it back. He wants to infuse it with life. He wants to bring his resurrection power into that dead and hopeless situation in such a way that all your disappointment would then melt away when you're confronted with the reality of his identity, who Jesus is. I am the resurrection and the life. Jesus says to Martha, do you believe? Do you believe? Can you believe even in the disappointment? And then finally, can you believe even in the despair? Can you believe in the despair? Martha calls Mary. Mary's been at home the whole time. What's she been doing? Mourning. She's been mourning. This whole next scene is filled with mourning. Mary's crying. She's got professional mourners with her crying. Jesus is going to cry. Everybody's crying. Everybody is despairing in this situation. Everyone has finally let it sink in that this is it. This is final. We had all this hopefulness, and then now for 4 days, we've just been sitting in the despair. We've been sitting in the sadness. He's not coming back. And Mary gets up from her place of mourning and goes to Jesus and falls down at his feet. And from her place of despair, she expresses the same thing that Martha expressed in her disappointment. She says, Lord, if you would have been here, this wouldn't have happened. Second time we've heard this. She's laying at his feet. Jesus looks down, sees her tears, sees the tears of those that are mourning around her. And then Jesus said, or verse 33 said, when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. I wish I could explain this properly to you in a way that would make sense, but this is not just how we say when we say, that really troubles me, or even that deeply troubles me. What this is more like a picture of a horse that's preparing to ride into battle. And there's a soldier on his back, and the battle lines are drawn, and the horse is standing there, and he's snorting, and he's stamping his feet and turning around with this nervous energy because he knows something's about to happen. He knows he's about to ride off into the battlefield. And so he's there, and that's what Jesus says here. That's what 33 means here. This is a picture of Jesus determined to go out onto the battlefield. And so he asked Mary, he said, where's the grave? And they take him to the grave, and it said Jesus wept too. Why does Jesus weep? He knows what he's about to do. I don't know, there's probably a lot of reasons. Maybe because he's not just God, but he's human. So he had human emotions. He was experiencing the sadness of it all, the despair of the situation, the way that sin wrecks and destroys and kills everything that is good and alive and beautiful. And he looks at all those things and he weeps. The point is Jesus, and you need to hear this, he steps into the despair with you. He steps into the sadness with you. He walks into your sad, despairing situation, but not just to sit there with you in it. Mary had been sitting for days, but Jesus doesn't come so that they'll keep sitting. He calls them to action. He weeps, but he's about to act. He's about to display something. He's about to show them his glory. So it's this weeping mixed with determination. He's about to go do battle with death. So he says, roll away the stone. I like this next scene. Martha comes rushing in at that moment. Like, roll the stone away. And Martha, who was all upset and all concerned because he waited too long, now is telling him to wait a little bit longer. Like, don't do that. Jesus, wait a second. Before you do that, you need to understand, remember, he's been dead 4 days. He's been in the ground. He's going to be decayed. He's going to stink. Don't do this, Jesus. And I love Jesus' next response. Jesus said, didn't I tell you already, Martha? How many times does God have to tell you that? Didn't I tell you already? Same amount of times we tell our kids that. Didn't I tell you already about that? Didn't I tell you? Don't miss this. If you believe, you're going to see. If you believe, you're going to see. Not if you see, you're going to believe. But didn't I tell you, if you believe, you'll see it. See what? What would she see if she just believed? She would see God's glory. She would see the glory of the Son, the glory of the Father. And then Jesus steps up and he prays in verse 41. He says, so they took away the stone. Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. Martha was right all along. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me. So he said this out loud in his prayer. This is why I waited. This is why I delayed. This is why I didn't come when you called me. This is why you went through the bitter disappointment. This is why you went through the despair and the heartbreak. I did all of that for a reason that you couldn't see. I did it to glorify myself and so that they would believe. In the resurrection and the life. Not someday, not one day, but today. Verse 43, when he said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. My voice is almost gone. I need a resurrection in my voice this morning. Lazarus, come out. And Jesus' voice here pierced not through just the cave's opening, not just through the grave cloth that's wrapped around his ears, but it pierced all the way through the barrier between life and death itself. And from the grave, just like Jesus promised would happen, in John 5:25, Jesus said, truly, truly, I say to you, an hour is coming and is now here when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. So Lazarus, the dead man, heard the voice of the Son of God calling for him to come out, and he came alive. And Jesus shows in that moment his dominion and his rule and his authority over life itself and over death itself. And then in verse 44, the man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips, and his face wrapped with a cloth. And Jesus said to them, unbind him and let him go. And this is what I want you to see as we close. Jesus wasn't just unbinding and unwrapping and unloosing Lazarus in this moment. Remember, there's a deeper level of this story. This is not just Lazarus raised and unbound. This is about you having your eyes opened. This is about you being unbound. This is about you being unloosed. This is about you seeing the resurrection and the life clearly, so that you might believe in the one who said, I am the resurrection and the life. And some of you this morning need to be unloosed. You need to be unbound. Unbound and loose from your disappointment in the dead situation that you're in. Unbound and unloosed from the despair of the situation that you're in. And you need an infusing of life from Jesus today. You don't need things just to go back to the way they were. You need new life. Jesus said, if you believe, then you'll see it. If you believe it, then you'll see it. So I want to close by asking you one more time. Hear the story. See the sign. You're confronted with the identity of Jesus. Do you believe?